In any long running dispute, words can feel like weapons, but every once in a while, someone makes a statement that's so absolute, so final, that it just cuts through all the noise. Today, we're digging into one of those statements and the chain reaction it kicked off. So let's unpack this incredible claim and the paper trail that puts it to the test. And here it is. This is the sentence at the very heart of this whole story from Brooke Hirschfeld. This isn't just a simple defense, it's a declaration of perfect, flawless honesty, 100% truth. I mean, that is a bold, bold claim, and it sets the bar about as high as it can possibly go. And that right there is the big challenge for us. Because a claim like 100% truth doesn't just exist on its own. It's standing in direct opposition to years of counterclaims from Gerald Paul Hirschfeld, or GPH, who has built his entire case on documents, on formal agreements, on legal rules. So how do you even begin to sort through all that? Okay, so first things first. Let's really try to understand the foundation of that 100% truth claim. We've got to look at how BH herself frames her own actions and her own integrity. Her defense is, well, it's absolute. She says point blank, she has never omitted information. She believes the conflict is all coming from GPH's misinterpretations and his personal anger towards her. So from her point of view, the issue isn't what she did, but how he chose to see it. All right, now it's time to flip the coin and look at the other side of this. GBH's arguments aren't just based on his feelings or what he remembers. They're rooted in a paper trail, in actual legal documents that were supposed to be the rule book for how they interacted. So our first major point of conflict is a huge one, the decision to move the children to another state. A decision like that is almost never simple, and in this situation, it was supposed to be governed by a very specific legal contract. And that contract is the separation agreement. It's really important we understand this document because it's basically the rule book. It lays out exactly what is and isn't allowed, and it's designed specifically to prevent these kinds of arguments by setting out the facts ahead of time. Now, look at this, because this is where things get really stark. On the left, the rule from that separation agreement is crystal clear. You need a written agreement or a court order before you move the kids. But on the right, GPH alleges that the move just happened anyway, in direct violation of that rule. This really sets up a pattern we're going to see again, a clear rule versus an action that allegedly breaks it. All right, let's move on to the next area of contention, money. Look, financial disputes are common, but in this case, they're tied directly back to that claim of telling the 100% truth. This here gives us a quick roadmap for the financial stuff we're about to get into. We're going to tackle 3 key issues. Was their son legally claimed on her taxes? Were child support payments diverted for something else? And what exactly happened with an agreement to waive back pay? So let's start with the taxes. BH's position on this cannot be more clear. I didn't claim RJ. She even had screenshots from her tax software that seemed to prove her point, showing only her daughter's box was checked. But GPH's counterargument is all about the difference between what a button on a website does and what the law actually says. He argues that if his son's name appeared anywhere on the tax forms, that legally means he was claimed as a dependent. So the disagreement isn't really about intent, it's about the legal consequence of the action. So how does a disagreement over payments lead to somebody getting their license suspended? Well, according to GPH, it's a 4-step chain reaction. He says he made direct payments for child support. Then, he alleges, those funds were instead used by BH to pay for their daughter's braces. Since that money was never logged as child support in the state system, it looked like he hadn't paid. And that leads to the real-world consequence. His driver's license gets suspended. And finally, we have the arrears waiver. You see an email from November 2022, and it seems to settle everything with a direct quote from Beach, "I have given consent to waive all back child support." Seems pretty clear, right? But the documented outcome was that the enforcement agencies just kept on collecting, which really makes you question whether her statement reflected what was actually happening. Okay, our final area of focus brings us to disputes about the children's welfare, specifically their education and medical care. And these are 2 incredibly sensitive and important topics. First, education. BH claims that GPH was 100% on board with the decision to have their son repeat a grade. But GBH's counter is all about a crucial omission of fact. He claims she left out that a decision like this also needed the teachers to agree, and he asserts they did not agree. So the fight isn't about whether he initially said okay, but whether he was given all the necessary information to begin with. Next up, medical access. Again, this separation agreement was clear. Both parents had the right to medical records. Simple. However, GPH alleges that he was denied access to his daughter's records by a therapist who was not only overseeing the kid's care, but was also BH's personal therapist. He argues this created a massive conflict of interest that completely destroyed trust. So, all of this brings us right back to where we started. After looking at the claims and the documented counterclaims, we are left with this huge, fundamental question. What even is the truth in this tangled web of personal history and legal paperwork? And this really gets to the very heart of the conflict, doesn't it? On one side, you have Brooke's version of the truth, which seems to be based on her own personal conviction and what she intended. She feels wronged, she feels misinterpreted. And on the other side, you have Gerald's truth, which is built on a foundation of documents, rules, and the literal words written in their agreements. So, we're left with this. When one person's sincere belief in their own honesty, their 100% truth, crashes into a paper trail that seems to tell a totally different story, what are we supposed to make of it all? It's a question that goes way beyond just this one case, and it forces all of us to think about how we define truth itself.